Nikki froze in the doorway. Strange women's shoes had been left in the hallway, and suspicious noises were coming from the bedroom. A banal situation, described by many TV series and books, except Nikki never thought it could happen to her. On almost unbendable legs, she approached the bedroom and opened the door. She wasn't mistaken. Paul, her boyfriend, was entertaining a long-legged girl with red hair in their bed. A lump formed in her throat that could have turned into a desperate sob at any second, but Nikki decided she wouldn't give these two the pleasure of seeing her tears. She turned around and walked out, slamming the door loudly. As she ran out, she gulped in air, breathing heavily and trying to calm down, but it was no use. Tears burned her face. "How could he?" she asked aloud. A passerby turned around, thinking the question was addressed to him, but Nikki quickly walked away from the house she had long considered her own. "I'll pick up my things tomorrow or another day," Nikki pondered, calming down a bit, though deep down she already knew she would never go back there. Tucking herself into a warm scarf, she hurried to the nearest cafe as a snowstorm began. Dark clouds gathered, and the wind was so strong it chilled her to the bone. Entering the cafe, Nikki was horrified to realize she had forgotten her purse. Searching her pockets, she managed to scrape together enough for a coffee. "Without a man, and now without even money," she thought, taking a sip of coffee. "Good thing I slipped my phone into my pocket, or I'd be without communication too." When she warmed up a bit, the waiter announced the cafe was closing soon. Nikki shivered looking out the window. The blizzard was in full swing, and this winter was especially snowy and frosty. She couldn't go home. She didn't want to see the man who had betrayed her. In her pocket, along with her phone, was a bunch of keys, one of which was to her office. With a plan in mind, Nikki hurried to the publishing house, where she had worked for years. "Who's there?" asked an elderly security guard. "Oh, Nikki, I'm sorry I didn't recognize you. What brings you here at this late hour?" "Mr. Wells, may I sleep in the study?" Nikki asked, her voice shaking from the cold. Mr. Wells had worked as a security guard at the publishing house for years. He was kind and cheerful, and all the employees loved him. "Of course, Nikki," he fussed. "How can I leave you out in the cold? Come in. I'll put the kettle on. You're shivering all over. You'll get sick that way." Nikki opened the office, took off her down jacket, and had a cup of herbal tea, carefully brewed by the guard. She valued her work very much. Paul was a director of the publishing business, while Nikki, having graduated from journalism school, joined Paul's staff and later became editor-in-chief. She quickly gained authority and respect among her colleagues, because she often took on Paul's responsibilities. She was always eager to help him, especially since they started dating. Though Paul never proposed to her, she sincerely considered them a family, and the stamp in the passport a formality nobody needed. "Well, that's it, Nikki. It's over. The man you thought was the love of your life has turned out to be a scoundrel and a traitor," she said in a low voice, and laughed nervously. The picture of betrayal came back to her eyes again and again, and locking herself in, Nikki finally gave vent to her feelings. In the morning she was awakened by a noise in the waiting room. The door was banging loudly. "Open up! Nikki, open up, I said!" Paul shouted. The woman's heart pounded frantically. She didn't want to open the door, but she had to. Paul entered the office without closing the door, even though employees were coming to work. "Why didn't you spend the night at home?" Paul asked. Nikki stared silently out the window. She was afraid he would see her tears. "But no, I won't give him that pleasure," she thought, trying to look at Paul nonchalantly. "Didn't mean to distract you, Mr. Talley, from important business." "Don't sweat the small stuff, Nikki. I'm a man, and my male nature couldn't wait for you to give me time. Think about it. One day you're tired, then you're working, then something else. And what do you offer me?" "Are you saying it's my fault you brought some girl into our house?" Nikki felt like she was having a hard time breathing. She had assumed anything, but For him to turn around like this was too much. She decided to end the conversation and tried to leave, but Paul literally pinned her against the wall.
"Where are you going? Do you really think I'm just going to let you go?"
he asked defiantly. "Let go, Paul. It's over. I don't want to see you again." Nikki tried to free herself from his strong grip, but couldn't.
"Have you thought well, Nikki?"
Paul asked angrily.
"You are worthless without me. Remember what filth I got you out of? Do you want to go back to the swamp you grew up in? No one will give you a job in this city without me."
Nikki was silent, trying to hold back tears. She had no family at all. Paul was the only person close to her at the moment. Her parents were gone when Nikki was very young. She was brought up by her grandmother, who also died not long ago. He knew how hard she bore the loss, and now he was hurting her again. "It's a shame I didn't see you for who you are after all these years," Nikki said, and feeling him loosen his grip a little, she broke free and ran away, unable to hold back her sobs. After running a decent distance from the publishing house, Nikki stopped. Her thoughts were confused. "Oh, how could he?" was the only question in her mind. She dreaded the thought of going back to the apartment to get her things and possibly meeting him there again. That was the last thing she wanted in the world. Sighing heavily, she wiped her tears and slowly walked along the streets, deciding to return for her things later when she had calmed down a bit. Nikki tried to rethink her life. Where had she gone wrong? Why had Paul started cheating on her? After all, he loved her. She could feel it. It was true that he had changed a lot lately. He was often irritable, rude, and always late from work. Now she realized why. Tears came to her eyes again when Nikki thought about it. It was the moment when she was trying her best to help Paul in his work and support him, and in gratitude he was having affairs with other girls. Coming to the flower store, Nikki stood still for a moment, watching the men choose flowers. Looking at her reflection in the window, Nikki smiled sadly. She saw a sad woman with eyes puffy and swollen from tears, with smeared mascara. Turning away from the window, she quickly walked away, immersed in her sad thoughts and not looking around her. Just at that moment, a man came out of the store with a huge basket of white roses, and Nikki collided with him at full speed. Some of the flowers scattered, and Nikki fell. "Watch where you're going," the man said irritably, but nevertheless offered his hand to help her up. At that moment, when he touched her hand, something happened to Nikki that she had been trying to forget all her life since she was a little girl. Her lungs burned, she felt dizzy, and her chest was on fire. She couldn't get up. Her body felt like cotton, and her arms and legs wouldn't obey. Only one picture kept changing in her mind. Nikki saw that the man standing next to her was burning in a black car. The flames seemed to be consuming him, and he was screaming. Feeling all his pain herself, Nikki lost consciousness. When she woke up, the first thing she saw was the concerned face of the very man from her vision.
"Oh, you petrified me. You need to go to the hospital. Why don't I call you a cab?"
The man smiled amiably.
"I'd take you myself, but I can't. I'm rushing,"
he said, taking out his cell phone to call a cab.
"Please, stay at home tomorrow. You are in danger,"
Nikki whispered.
"You must have hit your head. You should see a doctor after all,"
said the stranger. "No need, I'm fine." Nikki stood up and realized she was on a bench by the bus stop. "I guess when I passed out, he carried me here," she thought. The man shrugged and headed towards a black car parked nearby. "Wait!" shouted Nikki and rushed toward him. "I realize that you will probably think I'm crazy, but I beg you to listen to me. You must not go anywhere in this car tomorrow. I implore you, please, or your life will be in danger." The man smiled, clearly confused by what he heard. "Young lady, would you please go home? You really are overworked," he said as he turned around and got into the car. Nikki sighed heavily. He didn't believe it. Of course, she would have thought she was crazy too if she didn't know about her gift. Trying to get her thoughts in order, Nikki wandered toward Paul's house. She had to get her things. she had a small apartment on the outskirts of town that she rented out to tenants, so called them and let them know she needed her apartment in 2 months. Of course, she was sorry to kick out people who were very decent. After all, they had been renting the apartment for a long time, paying faithfully and keeping it in perfect order. But nothing could be done. She had to live somewhere. The closer she came to the house where she had lived for the last few years, the heavier it became on her soul. But when she inserted the key into the lock, she was stunned. The key twisted and wouldn't open the door. Nikki sat down on the steps and cried quietly. Paul has already changed the locks. Why did he do that? After all, it was he who cheated on her. She sat there on the steps until late at night, waiting for Paul, but he never came home. Nikki wondered what to do and where to go. Of course, she had an old house in a village outside the city where her grandmother lived, but it was quite dilapidated, even at that time. Her grandmother had saved all her money to buy her only granddaughter an apartment in the city, and now what had become of it? Nikki had been there since her grandmother died. After thinking for a while, she decided to go to the work office again. After all, today was again Mr. Wells' shift, and he certainly wouldn't leave her on the street. When she got to the publishing house, Nikki realized she was exhausted. Knocking, she heard the door open, and Mr. Wells came out, speaking in a guilty voice.
Nikki, I was told not to let you in here any more. Please forgive me.
Paul ordered it? Nikki asked with trembling lips.
He did. It was like that after you left. He literally went off the chain. He shouted at everybody and ordered to find your replacement. But it will be difficult for him to replace you. You've been working for 3 people.
The guard sighed heavily.
However, I can't leave you out in the cold. Come on in and spend the night in my staff room, and in the morning you'll decide what to do.
Thank you, Mr. Wells, replied Nikki, sobbing. Her head was splitting, and her heart ached with pain and injustice. But as soon as her head touched the pillow, she fell asleep immediately. She woke up when the sun was already shining, and she heard the noise of voices. After quickly cleaning herself up, Nikki went to her office. To her surprise, it was open. Nikki hurriedly gathered her things, mainly her laptop. Hastily throwing everything into her bag, she headed for the door. But at that moment, Paul stormed into the office.
What are you doing here? Who dared to let you in? You were fired yesterday, he hissed.
Don't worry, I came to get my stuff and my paycheck. I won't bother you again, Nikki replied. The man before her now vaguely resembled the one she loved.
Get out, but put your things back, Paul shouted.
But these are my personal belongings, and the laptop is mine too. Don't be crazy, Paul, Nikki replied, clutching the bag to her. At that moment, the enraged Paul was about to say something humiliating, his hand to strike her, but the secretary who had entered thwarted his plan. Mr. Talley, the CEO has arrived and is waiting for you in the study, said the girl.
You're lucky. Now get out, he shouted at Nikki.
I don't know why you act like this. Apparently it's payback for my loyalty and love for you. Just know that no one cancels the boomerang, and all the evil you did to me will surely return to you. You'll see, Nikki said loudly and ran out of the office. And on the eve of this ugly scene, Richard, the man who bumped into Nikki after buying flowers, had a conversation with his best friend. Brian, how annoying everything is. I feel like I'm suffocating from hopelessness, he said, sitting in a big leather chair opposite his friend.
Buddy, don't exaggerate. Anyone would envy you.
Stable business, income, the best girls. Your Alyssa looks like she's from a picture. You can't take your eyes off her, Brian replied, smiling. You're right, but I haven't enjoyed it for a long time. I want a real sincere attitude. And all these girls, including Alyssa, are only interested in the size of my wallet. Richard thoughtfully looked out the window. Well, just the wallet, laughed Brian. You were in great demand even in high school, because you were always considered handsome. Richard stood up and walked over to the huge panoramic window in his office. Yes, it was true, he was always in demand among women, and when the money appeared, doubly so. The office of his firm was located in the largest business centre, and the windows had a gorgeous view. At heart, Richard was a true romantic. True, he had to hide this feeling far away, so as not to be considered weak. In business, grip, restraint and toughness are important. Richard owned a large media holding, which included some publishing houses and even a television channel.
"I met a strange woman today when I was buying flowers for Elisa,"
he said quietly, continuing to stare off into the distance.
"And that woman was so good that she blew your mind?" asked Brian with a smile. "That's not the point. I didn't even get a good look at her, but I can't get her words out of my head. Can you imagine? She said I was in danger."
Brian laughed.
"Well, friend, it looks like things are terrible.
Do you believe in fortune-tellers and gypsies now?
Besides, we have an important negotiation tomorrow, remember?"
"Yes, I remember everything." Richard waved away. "By the way, we also need to stop by that publishing house we bought 2 years ago. They complain about it, saying the manager there has got completely off the rails. They say he's embezzling money. We need to get to the bottom of this." The friends said goodbye and Richard went home. At the door he was met by Elisa, who threw herself on his neck and affectionately chirped. "It's good that you're home. I missed you so much. Thinking about you all day." She hung on Richard's neck and began to kiss him.
"Elisa, stop it. I'm actually tired,"
Richard said, pulling away from her. "You're such a bore, Richie, and why do I even love you?" Elisa said, playfully pouting her lips.
"And do you love?"
Richard asked, looking into her eyes. "What do you mean by that?" Elisa began to get angry. Not getting an answer, she continued, "You are always dissatisfied and tired, as if you are some kind of old man." Richard walked to his room and then turned around and said,
"I don't keep anyone. If something doesn't suit you, you know where the exit is."
Richard lay motionless on his bed, thinking about his life. For some reason he remembered his childhood, when he lived alone with his mother. He considered this perhaps the best time of his life. They lived in a provincial town, far from the bustling metropolis. His father had gone to the capital to make money, but never returned. His mum worried a lot, but she raised her son to be a real man. When Richard finished school, his father suddenly appeared and offered to move him to the city to study, promising a good job afterward. As Richard later realized, his father's other family situation hadn't worked out, and there were no more children. So his father remembered his son, whom he had left a long time ago. By this time, Richard's father was a wealthy man and wanted to involve his only son in his business. Richard didn't want to leave his mother alone, and his resentment towards his father was great, but his mother insisted he go. Finally, the young man gave in. After studying at the university, he went to work for his father. Elisa was also introduced to Richard by his father. She was the daughter of a former prosecutor. Although after her father's retirement her family wasn't wealthy, they had great connections.
"Son, take Elisa as a wife. You won't regret it. The girl is the first beauty. Besides, she likes you very much. And her father's connections will open all the doors for us."
Richard's father enthusiastically persuaded the young man. At first, everything was not bad in the relationship between the young people. However, Richard began to notice he was only as a sponsor for Elisa. They had nothing in common, and everything was clear without saying. Recently, she began hinting it was time to legalize their relationship. Parents on both sides pressured him. Nevertheless, Richard delayed the proposal and increasingly thought about separation. Suddenly, the image of the woman he met this morning resurfaced, causing him to smile. Taking out his phone, Richard called Brian.
"Brian, I'm really sorry, but I will go to my mum tomorrow morning. I can't stay here. I'm suffocating in my own house. Help me out. Go to the meeting tomorrow instead of me." Well, buddy, you've gone completely into despondency. Brian laughed into the phone. But only on what will I go? You know my car is in repair after the accident. No problem, take my car and I'll take a cab to my mother. I haven't been to her for a long time and I miss her very much. Elisa, learning that Richard was going to his mother, made a disgruntled face. Richard, I thought we were going to the club to have fun. What did you forget in your backwater? This backwater, as you put it, is my hometown, the place where I was born and have many wonderful memories. And besides, the closest person to me lives there, Richard replied. Maybe you can take me too. Finally, I would get acquainted with your mother. No need. Go hang out with your friends. I want to be alone, Richard said firmly. He knew a girl like Elisa was unlikely to be liked by his mother. She was a sensitive person and would immediately realize there were no feelings between them. She had always taught him to marry for love only. Elisa, for decency, asked a little more to go with him, but without getting the approval of the groom, went to get ready for the club. Richard remembered he wanted to stop by one of his publishing houses and decided to visit early in the morning. He couldn't sleep for a long time. His thoughts were confused in his head, and he felt as if something was weighing him down. His whole life seemed to be slipping away. Yet he had no problems with money, but that was not enough. He just needed someone who would sincerely love and support him, and whom he would love. Once he tried to talk to his father on this subject, but his father only laughed. Son, leave this nonsense for stupid, hungry people. In our world, only the right calculations bring happiness. But didn't you and Mum love each other? Richard was surprised. We did, and you see where it led. Domesticity quickly ruined everything. As I recall, it was you who ruined everything and left us for a lucrative relationship. Richard grinned. And as you can see, it only benefited everyone. If I hadn't left then, we would have been living impoverished in the hole we were living in. And now, thanks to me, you are a successful businessman. You have everything you want. His father stood up, walked silently across the room, and raised his eyebrows. Don't tell me you regret what happened. Only a foolish, weak slob could reason like that, but not my son. Richard could barely restrain himself from snapping at his father, but clenching his fists in anger, he managed to restrain himself. He didn't want to look weak in his father's eyes. He'd spent his whole life trying to prove he could grow into a decent man without him, so he'd worked hard to build his own business and separate from his father. Yes, the start his father gave him was invaluable, so Richard kept silent. This conversation repeatedly came up in Richard's memory, and now, when he couldn't sleep, it came to mind. He managed to fall asleep only close to dawn, and soon the alarm clock rang. Remembering he had promised his friend to give his car, Richard called a cab. In 40 minutes he entered a publishing house, and immediately he heard strong screams and a crying woman rushed past him, almost knocking him down. To his great surprise, Richard recognized her as his recent acquaintance. But the woman didn't even look at him. What's going on here? Richard asked the receptionist in the reception area. The girl looked around, afraid someone might be listening, and said, Oh, Mr. Harper, here's the thing. Mr. Talai fired Nikki, and everything was running because of her. She's a wonderful person, and most importantly, honest and sympathetic. And Mr. Talai, well, the staff dislikes him, you know. The girl waited for a reaction to her revelation, but Richard didn't answer, deciding to deal with Paul, Mr. Talai, as soon as possible. Paul didn't wait long. He came rushing in a couple of minutes. Richard stared intently at him. What is it, Mr. Talai? You were appointed director of the editorial office, and there is no order. They complain about you, Richard began. I don't know who brought you all kinds of gossip, but everything is fine here, and those who spread false information are probably either competitors or dismissed resentful employees. Paul looked at the CEO brazenly, even with a challenge. That's right. Your staff turnover has been off the charts lately. Can you tell me why? Richard asked. The man sitting across from him was beginning to annoy him. We filter out defective employees. We select only excellent specialists, Paul answered quickly. I've noticed. In general, starting tomorrow, there will be an unscheduled inspection in the publishing house. You are free now. Paul obeyed, but Richard had time to notice how he visibly tensed up. Making a couple of calls to the central office, Richard ordered the best specialists to check this publishing office. Before leaving, he requested the case of Nicky from the personnel department, and then went to his mother's place, prudently stopping by a store to buy everything necessary. The anticipation of meeting a loved one warmed his heart. The place where Richard spent his childhood and youth had not changed a bit since his last visit. Unfortunately, he couldn't come often due to his busy schedule. After paying the cab driver, Richard stood for a while near the 5-story building he had often offered his mother to move in with him, or to buy an apartment in a newer, modern building, but she always refused. Breathing in the aroma of the frosty day, Richard smiled and walked into the entranceway. Elena did not expect to see her son, but was pleased at his arrival. "Son, are you all right?" she asked cautiously as he happily devoured her cooking. "Yeah, everything is fine, Mum," Richard replied monosyllabically. "It's just that you usually give me a warning. No, don't get me wrong, I'm pleased to see you. You just seem upset about something." "I'm tired of the hustle and bustle of the city. I haven't seen you for a long time. I missed you," Richard smiled childishly. Elena did not question her son, although she saw that he was obviously puzzled by something. That night, Richard, for the first time in a long time, fell into a deep, peaceful sleep and slept almost until lunch the next day, with his phone turned off. When he turned it on again, messages poured in, as if he had been out of touch for a month. "Call me back right away." There were at least a dozen such messages from Brian. Among them were messages from Alyssa, but Richard decided to deal with them later. Brian immediately answered his call. "Where have you been? I thought something had happened to you." "You've got everyone on edge," Brian shouted into the phone. "Wait, what happened?" Richard was surprised. It turned out that Richard's car had been in an accident and could not be restored. In the evening before going on business, instead of Richard, Brian remembered that he forgot important documents in the office, so he asked the driver to go get them. But the driver got into a terrible accident, and he was in the ICU now. According to the preliminary version, the car had damaged brakes and a gas tank. The car caught fire. "It's not an accident, the police already said," Brian continued. "You and I are lucky. Too bad about the driver. Young guy, newly employed." Richard quickly jumped up and started for home. "Son, are you leaving already? I haven't had an opportunity to talk to you yet." Tears glistened in his mother's eyes. "I have to leave, Mum. I'm sorry. I will definitely come soon. Do not worry." Richard kissed his mother and almost ran to the cab. After 3 days, the official examination confirmed the worst speculation. Meanwhile, Nicky's life was not going well either. The last payment she received was minimal, although Nicky's salary was also not high in relation to her employment and responsibility, and she had never asked Paul to raise her salary. It was embarrassing in front of the staff because everyone knew they lived together. It seemed to Nicky that by doing so she was contributing to their family. 2 hours on a cold train seemed like an eternity. When she got off at the desired station, Nicky felt cold. The wind was blowing through her, and it was a long way to go. It was useless to call a cab. No car would go to the village in such weather. Pulling up her scarf and shoving her hands into her pockets, she walked along the barely visible path. She was practically exhausted when the familiar village showed in the distance. Just a little longer, Nicky thought to herself, gathering her strength.
Suddenly, she thought she heard a strange sound nearby. Nikki looked around and noticed a human figure lying in the snow. Cautiously approaching, she heard a man muttering. "What's the matter with you? Are you not well?" the woman said aloud. The man said something, but Nikki couldn't make it out. Taking her phone out of her purse, she shone the light on his face. "Tom! Is it really you?" In the person lying in the snow, she recognized her classmate, who lived not far from her. In childhood they were very friendly, and in their youth Tom even confessed his love to her. Later, her grandmother said that he went down a crooked path and started drinking. Now, Nikki realized that the guy was dead drunk. She couldn't leave him lying there. He'd just freeze to death in a blizzard like this. She didn't know whom to call, and her cell phone was practically dead. Nikki looked toward the village. It wasn't that far away. She couldn't lift the man, so tearing some plastic bags and tying them together, she turned Tom over and laid him on top of the bags. This way he could slide in the snow. Her strength was leaving her, and her hands were stiff without gloves. After an hour, she managed to drag him home. Knocking on the window of his house, Nikki saw Mrs. Martinez, his elderly mother. Together they carried him inside. The woman thanked Nikki for a long time, trying to persuade her to stay the night, but Nikki hurried to her home. The shriveled gate and peeling paint made the house look uninhabited. Finding the key in its usual spot, Nikki sighed with relief. The house was cold and damp. One window was broken. There wasn't much wood in the stack, but it would be enough for a few days. Nikki quickly heated the stove and looked for something to fix the window. Apart from a piece of old linoleum, nothing could be found in the back room. Deciding to make do with it for now, she set to work. After a while, the window no longer let in the cold, and the heat from the furnace gradually filled the house. Nikki lay down on the bed and fell asleep. She woke up with unbearable pain in her hands. They were not their usual colour. Nikki realized she had frostbite. At that moment there was a knock at the door. On the threshold stood Mrs. Martinez with a basket in her hands. "Nikki, hello, I'm sorry I didn't have an opportunity to thank you yesterday. Before I put my son to bed you'd already run away." "Well, I didn't do anything special, only what I should do. I couldn't leave him in the cold." Nikki smiled embarrassedly. "You can come in, but I don't have anything to treat you with. I'll go to the store today and get some provisions." "Oh dear, but the saleswoman won't open the store in this weather. Here, I've brought you some goodies. Homemade chicken, eggs, milk and cottage cheese. I also brought some herbal remedies. You'll have tea and jam." The elderly woman put the basket on the table. Nikki took out the goodies and thanked her neighbour. "Still, the world is not without good people," she thought to herself. "And what brings you here, my little girl, especially in such bad weather?" Mrs. Martinez asked. "The circumstances turned out so," sighed Nikki. She didn't want to share the details. Parting with her neighbour, Nikki began to clean and prepare dinner. The house was already warm enough. In an old trunk, she found her old sports suit. Grandma always put things in the trunk, saying everything in life can be helpful. How right she was. Thinking of Grandma brought tears to Nikki's eyes. It was as if she knew everything in advance. It was not without reason that people treated her warily in the village, but everyone respected her. No one knew about her gift, only her granddaughter. The rest could only guess. Meanwhile, Nikki's hands ached more and more. Her throat began to hurt, and by evening she felt feverish. There were no medicines in the house, only herbs brought by a neighbour and a little jam. Waking up in the morning, Nikki felt even worse. Her strength was almost gone. The fever didn't subside. She periodically slipped into dreams, often of her grandmother and their times together. Her parents died when Nikki was almost 7. The bus taking them to work overturned and fell into a ravine. Everyone survived except Nikki's parents. It was as if her grandmother knew it would happen. Once, as an adult, Nikki asked her why she didn't dissuade them from going, if she knew everything. "It's not in my power to decide people's fates, granddaughter. You can't escape fate, no matter how bitter it is." From then on, they lived alone with her grandmother. The old woman took care of her granddaughter as best she could, and even managed to buy a small apartment in the city for her. Nikki adored her grandmother and tried to help her in everything. Nikki later learned she also inherited her grandmother's gift. Visions were rare, but very frightening to her. Nikki felt she was on fire, but had almost no strength to get out of bed. There was a knock at the door. Nikki tried to lift her head, hoping the person at the door would help her. Gathering her last bit of strength, she slowly made her way to the front door. The knock was repeated, but as she opened the door, she lost consciousness. And 15 minutes before, Richard had been desperately driving around the village looking for the house he wanted. There were no numbers on the houses or street names, so Richard almost lost hope of finding his. Knocking at one of the few houses with a light on, Richard hoped to find out something about her. The elderly woman who opened the door let him in.
"I only know one girl named Nikki whom you might be looking for," she replied. "It's mostly old people who live here, and people like my son."
She nodded at a man snoring loudly on the bed. The smell of booze in the room spoke for itself.
"Can you imagine? Nikki recently saved my dummy from a cold death. She dragged him on her back when she found him in a snowdrift. Thank her for me once again. I can't go myself. I've been sick for 3 days and can barely get up."
Now Richard knew which direction to go. Finding the right house, he noted that the door was covered with snow, and only a dim light indicated someone was inside. No one answered the knock, so he knocked again before hearing footsteps. The woman opened the door and then collapsed. Richard managed to catch her and carried her inside to the bed. Her face was pale and she clearly needed to go to the hospital immediately. The SUV he borrowed from his father could easily handle any snowdrifts. Wrapping the woman in a warm blanket, he carefully placed her in the back seat of the car and headed to the hospital. Richard carried her into the emergency room in his arms.
"A separate room, medication, I'll pay for everything. I beg you, help her," Richard pleaded.
"Don't worry, it's our duty," replied the doctor. Nikki was taken away with a promise to update him on her condition as soon as they knew more. All the way home, Richard thought about her. Not every woman would risk her health to save some alky, he thought. When Nikki opened her eyes, she couldn't figure out where she was. It took a while before she realized it was a hospital. Her hands were completely bandaged, and a vein was connected to an IV drip. How she had gotten here was unclear. The nurse who entered smiled affectionately. "You've come to your senses at last. Now I'll call the doctor." With these words, she hurried out the door. The doctor examined Nikki for a long time, asking many questions about her well-being, particularly about her hands.
"Well, Nikki, your condition was stabilized, and the development of pneumonia was stopped by drugs. For now, you should remain under observation until you recover completely. Rest," the doctor concluded, and left.
Nikki stayed in the room with the young nurse who was changing the medicine in the drip. "Your husband is a good man. He brought you in his arms and raised the whole staff on alert. He got the expensive medicine. Any woman would envy you. And he's so handsome. Oh, I'm sorry," the nurse faltered, seeing Nikki's serious expression. "Husband, you say?" Nikki didn't understand what was happening. Recent events had been erased from her memory. It was difficult to believe that Paul could take care of her, especially after what had happened between them. But then, who? The next couple of days were the same. Procedures, injections, medications. The young nurse periodically brought treats her husband had given her, each time admiringly talking about him. Nikki was dozing when Richard entered the room. After 2 days, the woman looked different. There was a blush on her cheeks, and her breathing was even and calm. From the doctor, Richard learned that her hands were badly damaged and required long treatment. During these days, he had managed to learn a lot about her. He studied her file from the personnel department and talked to colleagues. Nikki felt his presence and slowly opened her eyes. "You?" she whispered.
"Hi, I'm Richard. We never got to meet properly." He smiled. "I'm sorry if I offended you that day." It's me who should be sorry. I said a bunch of nonsense. You probably thought I was crazy, didn't you? Nicky replied. That's the thing. Now, I owe you a debt of gratitude. You saved my life, one might say. I never believed in such things, but your words made me cancel my trip. Thank you. Nicky was silent, unable to cope with the hitched breath in her chest. His touch was like an electric shock. She had only felt something like that when she first learned of her abilities in her distant childhood. Nicky remembered how frightened she'd been then, and her grandmother had calmed her down. She felt dizzy and slowly sank back onto the pillow. You'd better rest for now and not worry, Richard said caringly. Would you like me to read to you? He suddenly asked. Nicky nodded. Richard sat down on the edge of the bed, took out a book and began to read. Nicky did not listen to the text. His voice was so pleasant that it was hypnotizing. She was silent, trying to discreetly observe him. Today he looked different from the first time they met. Then he was wearing a suit and a strict overcoat. Now he wore blue jeans and a plain sweater. His hair was dark, medium length and neatly combed. The man was clean-shaven, and the scent of his perfume was faint but very pleasant. Richard came in every day. At first the conversations were a little awkward, but in time they began to talk like long-time acquaintances. Common interests, views on life, sense of humour, and of course working in the same field brought them closer. How did you find me then? Nicky asked one evening when Richard was, as always, nearby. He grinned. It's a long story. I had to meet your former director and get your address. You talked to Paul? Nicky marvelled. Yes. Richard immediately changed the subject, and they never returned to this conversation again. A few days later, the attending physician finally said, Nicky, I must tell you that tomorrow you will be discharged. The tests care quite decent. We will give you a referral for further treatment at another clinic. Unfortunately, your hands are not healing as fast as we had hoped. The doctor said something else, wrote recommendations on a sheet of paper, and promised to give all the other papers tomorrow at discharge before leaving. The news of the imminent discharge, strange as it may seem, upset Nicky. She did not want to return home. It was very scary to manage everyday life with injured hands. Nicky realised she could hardly cope, and there was no money for continued treatment. The treatment she was receiving now, as the nurse had hinted, was paid for by Richard. That evening, for the first time, he did not come to see her. Nicky waited until nightfall, but in vain. Sleep didn't come either, and various thoughts filled her head. Having spent almost the whole night awake, early in the morning she gathered her few belongings and went to the doctor's office. After picking up the discharge papers, she slowly made her way to the exit. Nicky! She heard a familiar voice very close by. Oh, I was afraid I was late. Richard was standing with a bouquet of flowers. I'm sorry, yesterday I couldn't come. I was so busy. I had to solve many important things. Let's sit down, we can talk, Richard offered, pointing to the hospital cafe. I talked to the doctor, Richard began. He told me that you need further treatment and it's quite serious. I don't think you should go back to that house in the village. It is practically uninhabitable, and getting to the city for treatments from there is unrealistic. And how will you support yourself at home? Richard paused. I have an apartment in the city, Nicky replied quietly. I know that too, as well as the fact that you are out of work because of Paul, the man said tensely. I have a business proposal for you. I offer you a job and accommodation in my house, he said, looking questioningly at her. What kind of work? Doing what? I don't really understand. Nicky was confused. Her mind was a complete mess. Nicky, you're an excellent specialist in your field. I'm sorry, but I had to make some inquiries. I have a very interesting project in mind, but I need the help of someone I can trust completely. That person is you. I have confidence in you, and you have the necessary experience. So far, only a minimal circle of people know about it.
We'll discuss the details a little later. Richard covered her hand with his. I have a big house. You will have your own room and workplace. You will visit all the necessary procedures so that you recover faster. Think about it. Isn't that the best way out of this? I don't know. Nikki looked into his blue eyes, and after a short pause she agreed, thinking to herself, whatever happens. She did not want to part with Richard. He smiled and exhaled with relief. Then let's go. Nikki nodded and they headed to the parked car. It wasn't an SUV waiting for them in the parking lot, but a dark blue executive sedan. Decided to change my image, Richard laughed, seeing the question in her eyes. It was quite far to their destination. They had a casual conversation, laughing and joking along the way. But the closer they got, the more serious Richard became. Finally, he stopped the car at the entrance to a private village. Nikki, there's something else I'd like to tell you. Richard paused for a moment. In the house besides me lives Alisa, my girlfriend. This information hit Nikki like a cold shower. A lump formed in her throat and her eyes watered. I understand, Nikki replied in a shaky voice. Don't worry, Alisa doesn't understand anything about work, so no one will interfere with yours. Nikki nodded silently and turned to the window. Of course, she suspected that a man like Richard was hardly lonely, but deep down she had hoped otherwise. They spent the rest of the way in silence. When they parked in front of a large mansion, Richard took Nikki's things and gestured for her to follow him. Inside, the house was even bigger than it looked from the outside, but to Nikki's surprise it was quite cosy. It always seemed to her that such huge houses were like museums, devoid of coziness, but she appeared to be mistaken. Your nurse will arrive closer to evening and bring everything you need for your treatment. Make yourself comfortable for now. Richard smiled and walked out. Nikki sat on the edge of the huge bed and sighed heavily. The room was decorated in light beige colours, and she also found a door leading to a small office with everything she needed for work. She looked at her few belongings and, after putting on a home kit, decided that tomorrow she needed to take her things from Paul. But she didn't yet understand how. Toward evening, a nurse actually came to her, treated her hands, and gave her the necessary medicine. It was obvious that the woman was a professional, and she was also very pleasant to talk to, which Nikki now missed very much. When Nikki heard a knock on the door, she shuddered. It was Richard. He invited her to come down to the dining room for dinner. Nikki put on her slippers and followed him. At the table he smiled welcomingly, pointing to the seat opposite him. Can you forgive me? He asked. For what? Nikki didn't understand. For almost starving you to death. Nikki laughed. It's good for a girl to go dieting. You don't need it, Richard winked merrily, glancing over Nikki's figure. I see you're having fun, they heard a woman's voice. A young woman was coming down the stairs, approaching the dinner table. The cheerful mood quickly faded away. The woman walked up to Richard and kissed him. Hello, darling. And I didn't know we had guests. Can you explain? She asked defiantly. Yes, this is Nikki, my personal assistant. She will live in this house because of the circumstances. And this is Alisa. He addressed Nikki. But Nikki seemed frozen in place. She looked at Alisa and couldn't believe her eyes. The woman had bright red hair and looked very much like the one with whom she had caught Paul. Are you going to drag all the female workers to our house now, or is this one special? Alisa asked defiantly. To my house, you mean? Nikki saved my life, so I owe her a debt of gratitude. Will that explanation satisfy you? The man replied calmly. Excuse me, I think I'll go to my room. I don't feel well. Nikki was heading to her room when Alisa's words reached her. Richard, you're crazy. Look at her. What a helper. That dummy in the funny pyjamas. Alisa laughed nastily. Nikki did not hear the rest of the conversation. Her heart was pounding frantically. Maybe she was wrong about Elisa. Perhaps because there are many girls with such hair and she just imagined it. A little later, Nikki had dinner brought to her room. It was late in the evening. After eating a little, she realized she wanted some tea, a habit she had had for a long time. Opening the door, she went looking for the kitchen. There was a dim light in the house, which meant that most likely everyone had gone to their rooms. Finding the kitchen, Nikki made herself some tea. There was a huge fireplace in the living room, and the view from the window was spectacular. Without turning on the light, she went to the window. The huge windowsill was just right. Nikki cosily settled down on it and began to enjoy her tea. At such moments, she often remembered her grandmother. She remembered how she had first introduced her to Paul, and she had disliked him terribly.
"This is not your man, granddaughter. He's rotten inside. You know, you'll cry with him," said her grandmother.
But Nikki, in love up to her ears, did not want to listen to anything. Paul seemed to her a prince from a fairy tale, her first love. After graduation, Nikki moved into his apartment, renting out to her tenants. Paul got her a job in his editorial office, making her practically his right hand. As Nikki realized later, it consisted only in the fact that he shifted most all his duties to her, taking advantage of her efficiency and diligence. And so it was. Nikki adored her work, performing the daytime business and Paul's assignments, and could spend nights writing articles, editing, fully immersed in her favorite business. To her, an inexperienced girl, such a family life seemed ideal. Immersed in her thoughts, Nikki did not immediately notice the footsteps.
"Am I disturbing you?"
She heard Richard's voice nearby. He stood with a cup of flavoured drink in his hands. He was wearing a home robe, and his wet, dishevelled hair suggested that he had recently showered. She hadn't seen him like this before. The man took a seat next to her.
"I can't sleep either," he said.
"I like to sit in silence with a cup of tea before I go to bed." Think. Dream. Me too, Nikki sighed. And I also like to look at the night sky, at the stars. Evenings like that inspire me to do something new. Richard smiled. You're a wonderful woman, Nikki. I've never met anyone like you before. Tell me, how did you realize I was in danger? Nikki had long expected to hear that question. I don't know how I did it myself. My grandmother had the gift of foresight or something. I guess I got it from her. Only it was very rare, just a few times. She always said my visions were life-changing. That's it. No other explanation. Nope. Thank you, Richard whispered, looking intently at Nikki. The silence dragged on. I think it's time to go to bed, Nikki smiled, trying to lighten the mood. Yeah, sure. Get some rest. You've had a hard day. Richard wished her a good night and stayed in the living room. The next morning, Nikki woke up when the sun came up. Her arms ached, but not as much as before. Going to the window, she saw Richard heading to his new car. He was wearing a business suit today, just like when she'd first seen him. As if sensing her gaze, he turned around and looked at her through the window. Nikki smiled embarrassedly and waved at him. The man waved back and got into the car. Today, Nikki decided to familiarize herself with the work ahead, but first she should shower and have breakfast. Going downstairs, Nikki caught Elisa sitting at the table. The girl froze in indecision. You again? Listen, dearie. She turned to Nikki. This is a dining area for the owners of the house, not for the staff. Richard took you on loan to help with his work, didn't he? So please, have breakfast with the servants and don't spoil people's appetite. Nikki stood silently looking at Elisa. She had little doubt now that she was the one she had seen in Paul's apartment. Did I say something unclear? Elisa shouted. I'm sorry, I really should go, Nikki replied quietly, going into the kitchen. The cook made her coffee and gave her some sandwiches. Nikki took it all to her room, deciding to have breakfast there. The fallout from the meeting with Richard's fiancée was not pleasant, but by immersing herself in her work, Nikki was able to distract herself from her thoughts. A knock on the door interrupted her, and the maid brought in a huge bag, setting it beside the bed. "Here, take them," she said cheerfully, and disappeared behind the door. In the bags were Nikki's things. But how? How had they managed to get here? After all, they were at Paul's house. Mentally, she had already said goodbye to them, deciding to gradually buy everything she needed. While she was going through her things, happy as a child, her phone rang. "Hi," she heard a familiar voice say. "I hope all the stuff is there." "Hi, how did you do that?" "Never mind. I only called your former director and offered to prepare all your stuff," replied Richard cheerfully. "Thank you." Nikki imagined Paul's face at that moment and smiled too. Richard wished her a good day and hung up. The woman put all the things on the shelves and continued working. She broke away from the monitor screen only when it was getting dark outside, and voices were heard downstairs. She looked out the window and saw Richard coming out with his fiancée. Alyssa was dressed in a beautiful evening dress, and her head was decorated with an intricate hairdo. From the outside, the couple seemed perfect. Two handsome, successful young people. Nikki could not tear her eyes away. Richard carefully sat his companion in the car without looking out the window, from which a pair of attentive eyes watched him. Nikki's stomach reminded her that it was time to eat, since lunch had been skipped, so Nikki went down to the kitchen. Maid Tara and cook Sarah were already eating dinner. Seeing Nikki, they invited her to the table. "The master asked me to tell you to be ready tomorrow morning. You will go to the doctor," Tara said. Nikki nodded, chewing a flavourful piece of chicken. "Sarah, you're just the queen of the kitchen. How did you manage to prepare such deliciousness?" She praised the cook. "Oh, Nikki, thank you for your praise. Only not everyone is so pleased in this house." The woman grinned bitterly. "The owner's fiancé has already drunk her with her nagging," Tara explained. "The soup's wrong, the food's too plain, too simple, too lacking in sophistication, or something else. And she's got me all worked up about breakfast. I don't know what to make. When the master lived alone, he was always satisfied with everything," concluded Sarah. "But when that witch came into the house, no one is happy." Tara sighed heavily. "Listen," Nikki turned to the cook. "I have one recipe for delicious pancakes. The girls at work kept asking me to make them. I think it would be perfect for breakfast. I can share the recipe," she smiled. "I'd love to, baby," the woman cheered. After chatting a bit more in the kitchen, Nikki returned to her room. Richard and Elisa came home past midnight. Nikki did not sleep. She was immersed in work, so she heard the sound of a car pulling up. That Elisa cheated on Richard was clear, but Nikki decided not to tell anyone about it. It's someone else's relationship, and meddling in their affairs was not her habit. Although tormented by a heightened sense of justice, she wanted to do it, but stopped in time. Getting up early the next day, Nikki got ready for the planned visit to the doctor. After applying discreet makeup and styling her long hair, Nikki put on classic pants and a blouse, not forgetting the heels. There wasn't much time left, so she hurried to the kitchen to have breakfast and help Sarah, as she had promised the day before. And soon a plate full of flavourful pancakes with Nikki's special fruit sauce was on the table. Now that everything was ready, she savoured the aromatic coffee, glancing at the clock, afraid to keep the driver waiting. Richard showered, dressed, and went down to the living room, where Elisa was already waiting for him at the table. His head ached terribly. Last night did not bring the desired pleasure. Lately, joint outings with Elisa strained him. They rarely had breakfast together, so he was surprised. "I'm really surprised, and what made you get up so early?" asked Richard. "I decided that we don't spend enough time together, and eating together might make us closer." "Where's Nikki?
Why isn't she at breakfast?
As far as I know, she should be up by now, Richard asked, changing the topic. Don't you think servants don't belong at the same table with us? Elisa looked at her fiancé defiantly. She's not a servant. I thought I told you. She saved my life. That's why she is a guest in my house. Now what? Am I supposed to put up with this mongrel next to me? Have you seen the stupid pyjamas she wears? How redneck do you have to be to come down to dinner in your pyjamas in a decent house? Yes, I told her to eat with the servants and not dare disturb us. Elisa burst into a scream, unable to stop herself any longer. So that's it! Richard pounded the table for the first time and raised his voice. In this house, while I am the master, only I will decide who sits at the table with me. And if you don't like someone else's company, eat somewhere else. Having said this, Richard got up and went to the kitchen. There he found Nicky. She was talking sweetly with the maid and laughing merrily. For a second he stood in the doorway. Today Nicky looked quite different. Strict pants and blouse emphasized the dignity of her figure, and makeup and styling refreshed and made her image unusually gentle. Nicky, Richard called out to her. Come on, we have to go. Today I'll take you to the clinic personally. The girl followed him in surprise. Elisa, still sitting at the table, looked at the transformed Nicky with surprise and anger. You look great, Richard complimented her as they got into the car. Nicky smiled silently. It took them almost an hour to get to the clinic. Then they waited to see the doctor. By the time the doctor examined Nicky, both of them were exhausted and hungry. You see, the doctor said that the wounds will soon be completely healed, and you will be able to live as before, Richard said cheerfully. Yes, thank you very much. If it hadn't been for you, I don't know what would have happened to me, Nicky sighed. Let's not dwell on it. I've only repaid your kindness. Now, let's have lunch somewhere, or we might starve to death, Richard joked. They settled down in a nearby cafe. Richard ordered a full meal with several dishes, while Nicky only got a light salad and juice. So that's why you're such a Thumbelina, laughed Richard, comparing their portions. Lunch turned into a conversation about work matters, with both behaving casually and easily. How strange, we haven't known each other long, but it feels like I've known you all my life, Richard suddenly said, covering Nicky's hand with his own and looking into her eyes. It's as if fate sent you to me, so that at least something in my life appeared bright. Why do you say that? You're a successful businessman. You have everything. Nicky was surprised, her voice trembling. His heart was beating so loudly that it seemed everyone in the cafe could hear it. Richard sighed heavily. What do I do now? I got with the help of my father, and of course he doesn't miss the opportunity to remind me of it every time. Yes, I am grateful to him for the start in my career that he gave me, but I want to prove to him, and first to myself, that I am worth something. I've been thinking for a long time, and I've decided to realize my media project. I want to launch TV channel and an advertising agency. In general, there are many ideas, and I want you to help me. No one knows about it except you. I want it to remain a secret, at least for now. You mean Elisa doesn't know either? Nicky asked, dumbfounded by the information. No. Why not? You're getting married, aren't you? Elisa is far away from all this. She thinks money falls from the sky, Richard replied briefly. They stayed there for some time, making plans and discussing the best ways to make it real. They couldn't return home until dinner time. Elisa, who was watching them from the window, was literally choking with anger. Everything was collapsing before her eyes, and Richard was noticeably cooling toward her. Elisa ran out to meet them as soon as Richard and Nicky entered the house, throwing herself at him, she affectionately said. "Beloved, I missed you so much. I didn't have dinner without you. I'll order them to set the table. Nicky, I hope you'll join us." "I think I'd rather eat in the kitchen," Nicky replied. "Have dinner with us, please," Richard asked. Nicky nodded, unable to refuse him. After changing into her favourite pyjamas, Nicky went down to dinner. Everyone was already at the table waiting for her. Looking at the guest, Alisa tried to suppress a laugh, although it did not go unnoticed. "Sarah, I'd like for breakfast tomorrow those wonderful pancakes from this morning. They remind me of a taste from my childhood." Richard smiled. "Mr. Harper, with pleasure. Except it wasn't me who cooked them, but Nicky," justified the cook.
"Really?"
The man was surprised, looking at Nicky.
"To all your virtues, you also cook perfectly," he praised.
Nicky smiled embarrassedly. "You're exaggerating. It's just that we never had a cook." "I didn't like the pancakes at all. They're very greasy, and the calories are too high to imagine. You should be less fond of baking, Nicky, or you'll turn into a fatty," said Alisa sarcastically. "By the way, Nicky, tell me, please, at what market did you buy those funny pyjamas? Every time I see you in them, I can't help laughing." Alisa laughed unpleasantly. "They were given to me by a very nice person, so it is dear to me. Unlike you, I was born into a simple family where comfort was valued much more than ostentatious outfits and pathos. If you'll excuse me, I think I'll be going. I'm a little tired." Nicky walked out and quickly headed for her room.
"Why do you keep picking on her? Aren't you tired of it?"
Richard asked. "I was just asking. I can't stand these country ways."
"Oh, yeah? Did you forget that I am also from the province? Maybe you dare me. Nicky has a great education, excellent work experience, and a responsive heart. And what can you do?"
Richard raised his voice. "Maybe you want to trade me for this provincial girl. And I thought, why did you bring her here? Now it's clear. I hope you don't regret it," Alisa said, leaving the dining room. Richard couldn't sleep. Tonight he lay down in the living room. Nicky was constantly on his mind. It was easy and comfortable with her. He could be himself, and he was also insanely drawn to her. They had spent a lot of time together the last few days. Probably still in the hospital, he realized she was not just a random person in his life. In the morning, Richard woke up with a heavy head. Adding to this was a call from his father, who asked for a meeting in a disgruntled voice. The day promised to be full. Recently, communication with his father did not bring positive emotions, only reproaches and claims. That's why Richard decided to start his own business from scratch. But no one had to know about it yet, except Nicky. She was the only one he could trust. Hastily drinking coffee, Richard went to his father's office.
"What's the emergency?"
asked Richard, entering the spacious office.
"I won't beat around the bush. Alisa called me yesterday complaining,"
his father said, pausing and looking questioningly at his son.
"Ah, that's what it is," Richard grinned.
"And you decided to play peacemaker and mediator, right?"
"Don't exaggerate. Your fate matters to me. If you're doing something stupid, who's going to guide you but your own father?"
"Don't you think the time for parenting is long past? I'm not the little boy you abandoned when I needed you the most. I'm old enough now to handle my own affairs," Richard replied irritably.
"Don't be foolish, son. Alisa is perfect for you, and her father's connections will open many doors for us. Besides, the girl is deeply in love with you. What more do you want? And what's the story with some tramp you brought into the house?"
Richard looked intently at his father, and barely holding back to keep from screaming, said,
"Nicky is not a tramp, but a very intelligent and decent woman, and who I bring into my house is up to me."
He stood up and headed for the door.
I hope we understand each other, he said and left his father's office. He felt awful. He didn't want to see anyone. Almost no one. Getting into the car, he drove to the place where he planned to organise his new project. Nikki was there. Work was in full swing and the woman was full of enthusiasm. Richard saw her leaning over the papers and involuntarily admired her. Pouring 2 cups of coffee, Richard knocked on the office door. Nikki smiled. "You can enter without knocking. You're the boss." "You were so enthusiastic I didn't want to scare you. Besides, you got into the job so fast. Now I feel like you're in charge, not me." Richard laughed. After drinking coffee, they began discussing work points. Nikki found some excellent specialists, including from her last job. She also arranged a meeting with representatives of the firm manufacturing the needed equipment. "I've also designed the office space and prepared some sketches for you to look at." Nikki held out a folder. "You're a miracle. God sent you to me. No other way." Richard walked up to Nikki, taking her hands in his. The girl was silent, and he too, without taking his eyes off her lips. The desire to kiss her was so strong that he barely restrained himself, afraid of her reaction. Suddenly, the phone in his pocket rang loudly. Richard picked up the receiver, stepping back to the window. From his pale face and the excitement in his voice, Nikki realised something bad had happened. "There's trouble with Mum. The hospital called. I need to go right away." "Sure, if you need help." Nikki didn't have an opportunity to finish the sentence. "I'd like you to be there for me, please." Richard took her hand and Nikki, taking her outer clothes, followed him. It took them quite a long time to reach their destination. Despite winter coming to an end, the weather was really wintry. Heavy snowfall literally covered the road, paralysing traffic on some parts. Richard's phone rang several times, but he rejected the calls. They arrived at the hospital almost at night and went straight to the attending physician, who said that Richard's mother had had a heart attack. After describing the situation, the doctor authorised a visit in the morning, as the woman was conscious. "There is no point in going back. The roads are completely snowed over." Richard addressed his companion. "Let's spend the night in Mum's apartment, if you don't mind, of course." Nikki didn't oppose. She couldn't imagine her life without this man. Strange, but not so long ago, she thought she loved Paul. And now she tried to chase away thoughts of Richard. He had a fiancé, but when he was near her or touched her, every cell in her body responded. She liked everything about him. His velvet low voice, his smell, his smile, and his eyes. Nikki had never experienced this with Paul. She certainly liked him, but there had never been such an incredible attraction, not even at the beginning of their relationship. In the building where Richard's mother's apartment was, there was a 24-hour supermarket where they stopped to buy some food. The small apartment was unusually clean and cosy. Nikki noticed it at once. Richard immediately changed into home clothes, which suited him well. A simple t-shirt and shorts looked good on his figure. Nikki admired, trying not to give herself away, although her heart was ready to jump out of her chest. The apartment was full of photos of Richard at different moments of his life. While Nikki settled in, Richard began to prepare a simple dinner. "Richard, if it is possible, I would like to take a shower," Nikki asked hesitantly. "Sure, the bathroom's over there," he showed her. "But I don't have a change of clothes," Nikki said, embarrassed. "I don't think anything from my mum's closet will fit you," he smiled. "Maybe my t-shirt will be helpful? You're so petite. It'll be like a dress." When Nikki was in the shower, she got more and more worried, imagining that they would have to spend the night in the same apartment. When she finally appeared in the kitchen doorway, in a t-shirt with a towel on her head, dinner was ready. Richard froze when he saw Nikki, flushed after the shower. "My clothes suit you very well," he said at last, without looking away. "It smells perfect." Nikki tried to lighten the mood. I'm not sure if it's edible, but we have no choice. Richard smiled. Surprisingly, everything was delicious. During dinner, the tension eased a bit. Richard discussed the years he had spent living in this apartment with his mother. He even shared about his difficult relationship with his father and childhood offences. Nikki listened attentively, not interrupting. Richard opened up to her in an entirely different way. After dinner, Richard showed photo albums, telling stories associated with each photo. "You were lucky. You had a wonderful childhood and a wonderful mother," Nikki said thoughtfully. "Take care of her, because family and relatives are the most precious thing a person has. I would give a lot to have my loved ones near me, but unfortunately, it's impossible." A tear rolled down Nikki's cheek. Richard touched her cheek and wiped the tear away. She looked so defenceless at that moment. He wanted to hold her and protect her from everything. Instead, Richard suddenly leaned over and kissed her. The kiss was filled with tenderness and passion that both of them could barely handle. Nikki responded to the kiss. It seemed as if the whole world froze in that instant. Richard picked Nikki up in his arms and carried her to his room, never stopping kissing her. He gently laid her on the bed and asked, "Are you sure you want to do this?" "One word from you and I'll stop." Instead of an answer, she gently wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him without saying a word. This night was theirs alone, and the closeness was not just physical. It felt like soulmates gathering. Waking up in the morning, Richard looked at Nikki sleeping on his shoulder. She was even more beautiful in her sleep. He decided to break up with Elisa. After last night, it was foolish to continue their already meaningless relationship. Now he realized that he had lost his head and could no longer live without Nikki. The phone on the table vibrated. Trying not to wake Nikki, Richard went into the kitchen and closed the door behind him. But as soon as he left, she opened her eyes. She wanted to scream with happiness. Pulling on her t-shirt, she wanted to go out, but heard snatches of conversation that held her at the door. "Elisa, stop it! Mum's in the hospital. I'll be there tomorrow or in a couple of days, as soon as her life isn't in danger," Richard said, and Nikki realized it was just a one-night meeting for a man who was about to get married. The morning was busy. After breakfast, they went to the hospital. First, Richard visited the attending doctor, and then they went into his mother's room. The woman was weak but very pleased to see her son. When Nikki decided to leave them alone, the woman said, "You're glowing, son. I'm so pleased that you have finally found your love." Richard held her hand and smiled. They stayed together for 2 more days, until the doctor informed them that there was no longer any danger to his mother's life. Early in the morning, they got back to the city. "I'll talk to Elisa today and explain that we need to part," Richard said as they entered the house. But in the living room, his fiancée was already waiting for him. She immediately threw herself into his arms, talking about how much she missed him. Casting a contemptuous glance at Nikki, she kissed Richard on the lips, confusing him. Nikki hurried to her room, but soon heard a knock. It was Elisa. "You want to take away my fiancé? You'll never get away with it. You know why? I'm expecting a child. Our child. Everything was fine before you came to this house. I think you realize that you are the third wheel and will make the right decision." With these words, Elisa left the room, leaving Nikki dumbfounded. 2 hours later, Nikki's things were packed, and she was waiting for a cab. Suddenly, someone touched her shoulder. "Nikki?" She heard a painfully familiar voice. "Don't. Richard, don't say anything. I have to leave. Elisa's right. I'm the third wheel, and it's better for everyone. A child is sacred. I'll never get over it." Nikki's voice trembled. "I'm sorry it happened like that. I didn't know, really. But I want to be with you, don't I?"
Richard looked into her eyes, hopefully. I'm sorry. I have to go. The cab's waiting. Yes, I don't refuse to be involved in the development of your company, but it will be better if we don't see each other. It will be easier for both of us. Nicky turned away and headed for the cab. Richard remained standing, watching the departing car take his happiness away. Yes, he could leave Elisa and help her and the child financially, but he realized Nicky would not support or accept such a decision. Nicky settled into her apartment, which had already been vacated by tenants. From morning until late evening she worked hard, gradually making progress and solving many issues. She loaded herself with work to have as little spare time as possible. Richard did not stop thinking about her for a minute. Through the firm's workers, he learned a lot about Nicky and followed her life. He knew she was highly respected and appreciated by all employees. Being at home was sometimes unbearable. Elisa was unpleasant to him, and only the thought of the child kept him close to her. Their wedding was scheduled for the next month, but he tried not to think about it. One evening, feeling particularly down, Richard decided to visit Brian to distract himself. His apartment door was ajar, so Richard decided to enter. As he stepped inside, he heard two men shouting. One voice belonged to Brian. The other seemed vaguely familiar. "Why'd you try to blow up the damn car? How could you even think of doing that? Besides, I could have gotten hurt too," Brian shouted. "What did you expect me to do? You promised me money and I never got any. Plus, all these inspections started. He would soon get to the bottom of it. And who would be to blame? You, of course. Who would be above suspicion? But me. I asked you to wait a little longer. He trusts me 100%. But we had to proceed with caution. And after the incident with the car, he's been scrutinizing and controlling everything. I had to lay low," Brian said. "Great. And now, after all the checks, I'll be thrown out on the street. Elisa left me, and she's pregnant with my child, but she said she's not going to be with a beggar. That blessed Richard took her word for it that the child was his. We're in love, but money decides everything. Either you pay me right now, or I go and tell him what a good friend he's got." Richard entered the room, and both men froze in shock. Brian's interlocutor turned out to be Paul, Nicky's ex-husband. "And I really thought you were a friend." "Almost a brother." Richard turned to Brian. "Too bad." That same evening, Richard kicked Elisa out, and in the morning his father called, threatening to take away the company if he didn't change his mind. "Take it away. I'm tired of your control. I don't want to see any more of you." Having said this, Richard disconnected the phone, took his car keys, and drove to a familiar address. Nicky immediately opened the door. "Sorry, I'm a fool. Elisa is not pregnant with my child, and I can't be without you." Nicky was silent, and a tear ran down her cheek.